This is Gemara Baba Basra Daf Pay, and all the learning for this month. The month of Elul has been generously sponsored by a close friend of the Daf as a Schos Aliyas Neshama, Professor Esther Rezel Basra Meir B'Siyata Dishmaya. The learning of the entire Chabura, each word of Torah, bringing the most incredible Aliyas Neshama, should bring Esther Rezel Basra Meir to a higher place in Gan Eden Shel Maila, closer to the Kisei HaKavod as a Neshama's Nene Meziv Hashchina. Holding on, Peyam Aleph, the new Mishnah. The Mishnah begins, Alokeach Peiros Shevech Mechaveroi. Someone buys literally the Peiros, which is that which is produced, not the fruit, of a Shevach Mechaveroi. Shevach is a dovecote. Shevach is an area in which the birds, in which the doves lay their eggs and breed more and more doves. So you bought the peiros, you bought the production of the shevach. I mean, you're going to get the amount of birds, doves that are produced for this amount of time. As the Tab Rashbam speaks out, for example, if someone says to his friend, "Machar li peiros shana zu, mashe yolda b'chol chodesh, avali mois loy kana." You're not kind the first pair. You're not kind the mother. The reason being, excuse me, and the Rashbam continues to teach us a little bit about how the birds reproduce. Excuse me. They produce two pairs, Zachar and Nekeva, every month, except for the month of Adar, that they don't give birth. So 11 out of 12 months of the year, they give birth. On the second, after 2 months old, these new birds produce their own children. So if you bought the production of a Shevach Mechaverai, says the Mishnah, Mafriach Breicha Rishayna, you have to allow the first Breicha, the first pair of doves, to fly away with its mother. And the reason being, because if you do not allow them to fly away with its mother, the mother might not feel that it doesn't have sufficient, and this is the Rashbam speaking out over here, does not have sufficient children, does not have sufficient companionship over here, and the mother might not come back and roost more children. So if you bought the peiros Shevach Mechaverai, very important, explains the Mishnah, you got to leave the Brecha Rishayna intact. Peiros Kaveres, someone bought the production of a beehive. Noitel Gimel and Nechilim, he takes 3 swarms of bees, Umisaris, and then he cuts off. Chalois Dvash, if he bought the honeycombs of the beehive, again, different parts of the beehive, Maniach Beis Chalois, then he has to leave 2 combs behind. Zaitim, someone bought olive lakuts to cut down, olive trees to cut down. Maniach Shtei Grufiyos, he has to leave 2 branches behind. And of course, the more detailed we're getting over here with these different items makes it complicated because we don't really deal with honey and bees, etc., etc. But the second case, when it says about nechilim, is that you're not it's defined by the bees. So when I decide to buy the beehive, I'm allowed to take the bees that will produce 3 swarms of those bees, and not necessarily the honey. Whereas on the next case, and then you cut off, and then what exactly does that mean? Either you stop its production, or we'll leave it at that. The next case is if you bought chalois devash, you bought the honeycombs, and not, again, the production of the beehive we define by the bees and not the honey. But if I said specifically I'm buying the comb, I'm buying the area that the bees create the honey, then I'm allowed to I have to leave 2 combs behind so that this beehive could continuously produce, and I take the rest. Says the Gemara, Vihatanya, we ask in a brisa, going back to the first in the Mishnah, the first day in the Mishnah spoke about leaving behind 1 brecha rishayna, 1 pair of doves. V'atanya, we learned in a brisa brecha rishayna ushniya. You can't just leave behind 1; you have to leave behind 2. So Amar Rav Kana explains like kasha hala ha le'ima. The first pair you have to leave for hala. The second pair you leave for the children. Ha le'ima, the first pair you leave for the mother. So it's true that you have to leave two pairs, but it doesn't contradict our Mishnah. When our Mishnah says Mafriach Bereich Rishon, that's referring to we have to leave for the mother bird. But what the Bryce says too, that's we have to leave another one for the child. Says the Gemara, Maishana Ima. What is unique? What's different about the mother bird that you leave one? To Mitzavasa Abrata. Why? Because it's attached as the accompaniment of the daughter. Va'azuga Ve'azuga, and its own mate, the daddy bird we'll call it, the Shavkin Allah, that we leave for it. And therefore, the mother bird's going to remain because it has a bird to mate and has a daughter. When it comes to the daughter as well, Nami Tistavasa Ima, it has the accompaniment of the mother, Va'azuga, and has its pair, the Shavkin Allah, that we have to leave for it. So now the question is, why do you have to leave another pair? The Gemara is assuming you have to leave another pair for the daughter. The Gemara is assuming that in the teretz of the Gemara, that you have to leave another whole pair of doves for the daughter. So answers the Gemara, Ima brata mitzavasa, but brata ima lo mitzavasa, which of course we could probably understand this in even conventional terms. But the mother gets accompaniment from the daughter, but the daughter doesn't feel that same level of chiba, a same level of warmth from the mother, and therefore the daughter requires more. And that's why we have to leave behind another whole set of doves to keep the daughter company. Now we move on to the next case of the Mishnah, which is the Bi Beiros Kaveres. We said Natal Gimel Nechilim. Take 3 swarms of bees, Umasaris, then he cut it off. And now asks the Gemara the point that we mentioned, we read the Mishnah, Bima Misarsan. How do you cut off the bees? How do you sterilize those bees? Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, Bechardal, with mustard. Says the Gemara, Amrim Rav Mishvei Rav Yosi Rachanina Lo Chalda Misarsin. No, you don't actually use chardal. You don't use mustard to sterilize the bees. Al mitoich shapiyem echad. But rather, since shapiyem chad, once their mouth has chad, it's bitter. Bitter from what? From the mustard. Chayzrais va'ichlais essence of shehan. The bee goes back and eats their own honey to remove the bitter taste of the mustard. And then when the bee eats its own honey, the teva, well, nes and teva are all one of the same that Kadosh Baruch Hu created, is now the bees stop mating. So if you want your bees to stop producing, you put a little mustard in its mouth. But it's not pshat that the mustard directly causes it to stop mating, but rather the mustard causes it to want to eat honey, and then once it's eating honey, it stops to mate. Rav Yechanan Amar on the second white line, Noitel Shlosh Nechilim B'Sirus. Says Rav Yechanan, you take 3 swarms of Nechilim B'Sirus. Alternatively, you take the first, the third, the 5th swarm, and you leave the rest. You don't take 3 in a row. You have to alternate, and the second swarm you leave for the owner. Masita Tana. In the Mishnah we learn Noitel Gimel Nechilim B'Zeh Achar Zeh. You take 3 one after another. So 3 different shitas, how you actually take the nechilim, how you take the swarms of bees, and you then stop taking because that wasn't part of the sale. Now we move on to the next case of the Mishnah. Chalais Tavash. We spoke about that if you buy the honeycomb itself, you have to leave behind 2 combs behind, 2 of the honeycombs. Amar Rav Kana Tavash B'Kaveres. Once we're on the topic of chalais, of honeycombs, the Gemara dives into a discussion of Tumah V'Taira as it relates to the honey and the honeycomb. So it says Rav Kana, the dvash in the kaveres, the honey in the beehive, does not lose its status of meichel, meaning just like food is mikabel tumah. It has the same din of Kabbalah's Toma with regard to food. Doesn't mean that it is or it is not. It just means that it has the same status of food. Says the Gemara, lo'ilam, lo'ilam, always. So almo, what do we see? 2 lines in the bottom. So it sounds like from here that according to Rav Kahana, that in order for something to be considered a meichel of food, doesn't need machshava. Don't have to actually have that in mind. Automatically, it is a food. It has a din of a food, as we see over here. While the honey is in the beehive, where the owner right now is not eating it, it still has a din of a food according to Rav Kahana. Misvei, but in that detail, as the Gemara, says the Bryce that the honey inside the beehive is neither food nor drink, and it's not a mekabel toma at all. Rav Kahana just said that it is. Amar Abaye, the last line, says Abaye, the Brisa that says that it's not mikabel toma, that it's not oichalu mashkeh. It's referred to those 2 chalois, those 2 rows, those 2 combs that are left for the seller. Those are not being removed, so those don't get a din of a food. But Rav Kahana said the rest of the honey in the beehive that's going to be removed, that yes gets a din of a meichel. Rava Amar Rav Elazar, Rava says no. You know, Pshat in the Brisa is it's Rav Elazar, whereas Rav Kahana holding the Chachamim who argues. Nan, as we turn over to Pei Amid Beis, says the Gemara, what's his machlekes Rav Elazar and the Chachamim as follows. Titanan, as we learned in our Mishnah, Kaveres Devairim, the honey. Just trying to get this a little zoomed in. Okay, let's try one more time. Nope, it's not working. Oh, there we go. Titanan, we learned in a Mishnah, Kaveres Devairim. Well, now you can't see the Rashbam. Okay, let's fix this. There we go. Titanan Kaveres Devairim, what is the status of the beehive? Rav Eliezer Omer, Areiki Karka, as din of Karka, Kosla, Prosbly cried a Prosbala, Nevena Mekabelas Toma. This should sound familiar as we had this a few days ago. Vena Mekabelas Toma, Mekayim of Ared, Vena Vishabis. Chayiv Chatas, Rav Eliezer holds that a beehive has the din of Karka for all intents and purposes. Amar Kosla Prosbal, Vena Kikarka, Mekabelas Toma, Mekayim of Ared, Vena Vishabis Potter. Whereas the Chacham argue and say no, it is a din of mitaltlin. So therefore, says the Gemara, that's who the 2 shitas are going to hold like on the bottom of Amid Aleph that we said that there's no toma. That's like Rav Elazar as the din of karka, whereas Rav Kahana who says doesn't have a din of toma, that is like the Chachamim. Amar Rav Elazar, my time of Rav Eliezer. So Rav Elazar, the Amayra, explains the reasoning behind the shita of Rav Eliezer. Why does a kaveres have a din of karka? Dersev says the pasuk Yitzvul Osam Bi'arois Dvash, that you take it and you dip it into the forest of honey. Says the pasuk. We had this already. If you detach something from Yar, the forest, chayiv chata. So says the Gemara, the machlekes of Kahana and machlekes Rav Kahana and the Brisa, it's coming machlekes Chachamim and Ravi Eliezer. Asks the Gemara, Meisvei, or about 12 lines down, the first one line is Meisvei. Asks the Gemara, Devash Azame Kavarasai, honey that flows from its beehive, Einoi Loi Oichav Loi Mashke. The Brisa says a blanket din, honey from beehive is not Oichel Mashke. So Be'esham Labayanicha. According to Abaye, we can explain that this Bryce is referred to those 2 chalois, those 2 combs, and that's why the Bryce says a straight up din that it's not mekabel toma, it's not oichel ala Rava. But according to Rava, who said that's machlokes of Eliezer of Kahana, what are we going to do with this Bryce? The reason on this Bryce specifically that it went on to a kli ma'os, meaning normally Rav Elazar holds that yes, the honey is yes mekabel toma. Over here we have a problem; it flowed onto something disgusting, and therefore it loses its status because it's no longer meichel. Or v'achbar Yaakov kunjezav al gabe kashkashin similarly went into splinters of wood, and therefore that's why it's not considered wood, not considered oichel. Meisvei asked the Gemara dvash v'kavasa ino leichav lamashke nocha Brisa. But this Brisa continues and says that chishul of achila, then But if you thought about a lamashkin, it was mashkin. So this brisa is a bit more verbose, which makes it more difficult to understand according to Yishita. Explains the Gemara. Bitch, I'm allowed Baye, four lines on the wide lines. I understand Nicha. According to Baye, it's good. Why? Because you can say it's talking about those two alloys, those two honeycombs. El Rava, Kash, always according to Rava, Amlacha Rava, Tritzachi, Chishva, Lachila, Einai Metame Tumas Eichlin, the Mashkin, Einai Metame Tumas Mashkin. Says Rava, the way that we're going to explain it is that when your Chishav Lachila, it's not Mikabel Tuma. Why? Because that's like Rav Eliezer. Rav Eliezer holds it as a din of Karka. So that's the reason why when your Chishav Lachila, it's not Mikabel. It's not Mekabel Tuma, because even when you're Chishav Lachila, why? Because you're going to Shita Rav Eliezer that has a din of karka that it's called land, and land is never Mekabel Tuma. Tani Kavasi Rav Kana, we have a raya. Tash Dvash B'Kavarasa honey in its bi Metamet Masechlin Shaloi B'Machshava, like we started off with a raya to Rav Kahana. Says the Gemara on the first white line, ending off, going into the end of our Mishnah, Zaitim lakutz miniach shtei grufiyos. That if someone bought olive tree to cut them down, you have to leave two branches behind. Tanu Rabbanan says the Gemara, lokeach ila mechaveri lakutz makbiyam min hakarka tefach. Someone bought a tree to cut down from his friend, you have to pick up your axe when you cut it down from the ground, a tefach. You have to always leave a stump that's a tefach. By kaitis, and you cut it down. Besulas hashikma, if you bought a sycamore tree, which is in its earlier stages of life, it's a besula, it's a virgin tree. Gimel tvachim, you have to leave on 3 tvachim. Sadin hashikma, it's a cut sycamore tree, base tvachim. Bekanim ubegefanim, in the case of reeds or the case of vines, what do you have to leave behind? Minapakakulamala, you cut from the knot and above. But the kolum of be'arazim, palms and cedar trees, chayfer, you could dig up, umesharish, and uproot the tree entirely. Fish in Gazan, Machlev, because anyways, the trunk of these trees, of the dekel and the erish tree, don't regrow, and therefore you're able to uproot it entirely. So says the Gemara, B'sulas HaShikma, the first case, when it came to the virgin sycamore trees, Gimel Tvachim Binan, really? Do you really need to leave behind 3 Tvachim? I'll ask you a contradiction. You're not allowed to cut down a sycamore tree, a virgin sycamore on Shemitah. Why? The reason being, because it's considered Avaida, it's Shemitah. Rav Yudaimer, Kedarkai Aser. To cut it down in the regular way, it's Aser. You pick it up 10 Tvachim, then you cut it down. Or you could cut it all the way from the ground level. Why? Because if you pick it up 10 Tvachim off the ground, you cut it all the way to the ground, it's called harming the tree. And therefore, during Shemitah, you're only not allowed to better the tree. To harm the tree, says Rav Yehuda, that would be allowed. Says the Gemara, it sounds like that only cutting it me'im haaretz, cutting it all the way from the ground, that's what's bad for the tree. But based on our brisa, sounds like leaving behind gimel tfachim, certainly 10 tfachim, is good for the tree. So why does the brisa say either magbiya you tfachim and cut it down or cut it from the ground? Sounds like once you leave 3 tfachim, it's good for the tree. Amar Abaye gimel tfachim alila me'amaretz v'adai kashila. When you cut it 3 tfachim, that's when it's good for the tree. When you cut it to the ground, that's when it's harmful for the tree. If you leave more than 3 tvachim, it's neither good nor bad. So Gabi Shviyas Avdina Midi Devadai Kashila. By Shviyas, we require you to do something which certainly is harmful to it. It's got to cut it all the way from the ground. And that's the reason why you have to leave behind 3 tvachim in that case. So it's not a stira, because it depends what you're doing. By Shvita, you have to v'adei harmitz, you have to go to the ground, or 10 tfachim. Whereas by us, you have to do what's good for it, and if we leave behind 3 tfachim. We go into the next part of the brayso. So this we're going to conclude. By the decal, by the erish tree, it doesn't regrow, and therefore you could cut it all the way mamish on the bottom. Says the Gemara of Eres and gives a machlif. Really, a cedar tree doesn't regrow. Darish of Chibar Lulinia. What is the meaning of the pasuk Sadik Hatamar Yifrach? Kares Balvanin Yiske. What does the pasuk mean that the righteous is going to flourish like the tamar, the date palm, and the cedar? The erez is going to flourish. Im nemer tamar, lama nemer erez. Vim nemer erez, lama nemer tamar. Says the Gemara, I don't understand. Why does it say that tzaddik is like both? Explains the Gemara. Ilu nemer erez, lo nemer tamar. You see, Aimer mai erez ein oisa peirois. A cedar tree does not make fruit. So I would have thought, Av tzaddik rachman lo tzanino, so pears can't be. Kach nemer tamar. Vim nemer tamar, v'lo nemer erez. You see, Aimer ma tamarin gizoy machlif. Av tzaddik ain't gizoy machlif. Lekach nemer erez. So see, erez is the quintessential example which gizoy is yes machlif. The chunk does regrow. Ella Hachama Eskinan says the Gemara 5 lines to the bottom. Bishar Mini Razim. Talk about other types of erez trees. Kidraba Ravuna, Damaraba Ravuna, Amri Beirav, Yon Mini Razim. 10 types of erez trees. Amar Eta Bamidbar Erez Shita Vadas Ve'it Shaman Asim Vigaimer. Eretz is Arza. Shita is Ternita. Hadas is Asa. Eats Shemen is a Farsima. Eats Shemen is a Farsima. Beraish is Barti, Tidar, Shaga, Vitasha, Shavina. Honey Zayin, these 7 types of trees. Honey Zayin Avi. Says more 1 second. This is 7, but it says it's supposed to be 10. Kias Rav Dimi Amar. Says Rav Dimi on the last line of Siva Aleinu, Aloinim, Almunim, Almugim. And what are these 3 tribes? Aloinim is Botni, Almunim is Beluti, and Almugim is Kisita. And those are the 10 types of erez trees. We turn over to Pi Alpha Aleph. We don't have that Amid for one more line. It says the Gemara, another pshat. Aronim Armonim Almugim. Aronim is Ari, Armonim is Dolbi, and Almugim is Ksita. So concludes the Gemara that some erez trees, Einachanami, Kizoy is Machlef. We're talking about the ones that is not, and that's going to be when you're able to cut it down all the way from the stump. We'll pick it up from the Mishnah on Pei Aleph, B'siyata Dishmaya.